People usually talk about what weapons are the meta, but what if we look in the opposite direction? What weapons are the worst in their categories? Now, to determine the category, I'll be going off the Tarkov Wiki's weapon categories. The rules for determining which weapon is the worst, I'll be looking at caliber, recoil and ergonomics, ability to modify, and fire rate. If it comes down to that, I might also include rarity and cost in the picture too. First off is the assault carbines. These are basically if you combine a designated marksman rifle and an assault rifle. In the game, these are mostly just semi-automatic only versions of the ARs. For this, I'll probably say that the 9A91 is the worst in this category because it's slightly worse than the VSK94. They don't really fit well with the rest of the weapons since they're more medium to longer range weapons, and since the 9x39 is not a good fit for longer ranges, it's not good in this category, in my opinion. Now, even if you want to argue that the 9A91 is better at close range than the other assault carbines, there's still better alternatives to it, such as the VSK94 in its ranking, but also the ASVAL and VSS being way better options than those two even. So they are more expensive, but you get them at the same trader level, and also you can use 30-round magazines with the ASVAL and VSS where you can't with the 9A91. Even though that those two are not in the same category, I would still say you wouldn't use this over those two, therefore it's the worst in this category. Next up is the assault rifles, and this one is a little bit harder to classify just because there's a lot of useless variants of different rifles. But in my opinion, the worst AR is the AKMSN. This is because it has slightly more recoil than similar variants, and this is because you can't change the stock. With the other AKMs, you can change the stock with the Zukov, and it makes it have less recoil. I picked the AKMSN over the AKMS because it had slightly worse stats than the MS, and also it was a tiny bit more expensive, and the only reason for that is because it has a mount where you can mount a sight mount on. However, you're going to be using the Bastion dust cover most of the time, so it kind of just counteracts that. You can't use the sight mount, so it's useless. Therefore, it's slightly worse. And I decided to pick this overall over the other variants of other AKs and M4s and whatnot because it seemed to be the worst variant out of the rest of the variants compared to their variants, if that makes sense. Next up is for bolt actions. The worst one is the VPO 251, unless you want to count the M18 as a bolt action, as it is technically classified as a shotgun, but it uses 7.62x54R, which is a sniper round, and you also can mount scopes on it, and it acts more like a sniper. Obviously it doesn't use a bolt action, but if you want to go down that technicality, technically the TAWS 106 uses a bolt action system. So if you want to classify that as a bolt action, then technically that is the worst. But if you're not going to count that, then I would say the MP18, and if you don't want to count that, then I would go back to the VPO 215 just because of its caliber, and it kind of lacks customizations. You can put a suppressor on, you can put the scope on, but you can't do much with it. Now it does have high ergonomics, which is nice for like using a hollow sight and doing quick sniping, like close range. Next up is the DMRs. I would say that the worst DMR is the VSS, basically for the same reason as I stated that the 9A91 is the worst, because the 9x39 is not good for long ranges. I don't know why it's in this category, but maybe it was a classification in real life or something, but I would just say that this is not a good fit for this role. However, if you don't want to go by that, then since it's good at close range, then I'd say the SVDS. This is because it has higher recoil and lower ergonomics than other DMRs when you mod it out. Obviously, it's the only 7.62x54R DMR, which kind of sucks because it's bad. If you don't want to include the VSS, then I would say the SVDS. This next one is easy. It's the grenade launchers. It's the FN40GL. Due to it being a separate weapon and only holding one round compared to the one that you get off the goons. That one's really hard to get, but it is better, obviously. And then the ones that you can mount on a weapon, you mount it on a weapon, so then those are better too, but technically those don't show up on this, but I'd count them too, and I'd say they're better. Next up is the light machine guns. The worst one is probably the RPK-16. Now I say this is because in thoughts of future patches, because we're going to get bipod mounting. So I wonder if the LMGs might have a little bit more of a useful role in future patches, since you'll be able to mount them. And there's no bipod mount that I know of for the RPK, so that could make it worse. If you don't want to classify the RPK-16 as the worst because it can sort of compete against the other AK variants, then I would say that the RPD is the worst. This is because the RPD-N can take a scope mount, whereas the RPD is stuck to iron sights. And the reason why I don't pick the PKM and PKP, even though they're a little bit more rarer, you have to get them off of Carbines, is because there's no other weapon in that class. There are weapons such as the Mutant and RD and AKM that can kind of do the same role as the RPD and have better stats. Obviously they have a little bit less of a magazine capacity, even if you use the drum mag, but with the PKM and PKP, the only thing closest to it is the ABT, and that is nowhere near what the PKM and PKP is. So for that reason, I'm going to say the RPD is the worst in this category, if you don't want to include the RPK. Next up is the shotguns, and the worst is the TAWS 106. It's because of its round, it's a little bit worse than the other ones. However, this is where it gets weird. If you don't want to include that, if you think it's a bolt action, because they use a bolt action, if you don't want to say the TAWS, then I would say the MP431C. Now I say this and not the sawed-off, because with the sawed-off you can use it as a secondary. So I think just because the sawed-off can be a secondary, it's a little bit better, even though you can't aim down sight with it, which is a little weird. But now for submachine guns, the worst one is going to be the Sagan 9. This is because it only can fire in semi-auto. However, since it does only fire in semi-auto, I will not classify it as a submachine gun. So I'm going to have to go with the PPSH. This is due to it firing really quickly, but it has the highest recoil compared to the other SMGs. And it also has a lot of smoke when you're firing it, so you can't really tell where it's going, and it has a bad round. And you can't put any attachments on it or take anything off really, so I'm going to put it as the worst SMG. Now with the secondaries, we start off with the pistols. The worst pistol is clearly the Blicky, however, since that's too easy, I'm going to ignore that. The worst pistol is either the PM or the TT. But due to the PM being able to take 81 round mags, I would say that it's better than the TT, which is capped at 8 rounds. The best rounds that the PM can use, whether for leg meta or just normal damage, slightly better than the TT. So due to the TT being worse than the PM, it's the worst pistol. However, because there's a gold variant, that one's probably even worse due to it having no other advantage over the base TT. Other than, you know, it looks cool, so technically it's worse than the base TT. Now for the other secondary category is the revolvers. For this I'm going to have to say the CR200DS. The worst flare is definitely the white one, because there's no purpose for it. It's brighter than the other flares, but that's kind of useless. Why would you want to light up an area? I don't know why you do that. Green flare can be used as an extract, yellow flares you need them for some quests. Red flare obviously causing an airdrop. Special green flare makes bosses friendly. White flare does nothing. As of now, maybe there will be some cool stuff in the future, but as of now, it's useless. For stationary weapons, they're kind of different. They're both different categories. However, I would say the grenade launcher is better due to it having a magnified optic and it doing splash damage. So the NVS is worse in this case. Next up is the melee weapons. The worst melee is the Bars A2607 Damascus knife. It has 1 less damage than the non-Damascus version, and every other stat with those two knives are the same. Now for grenades, I would say the worst grenade is the M67 in my opinion. However, if you're Will Z, you can freaking throw it like a mortar. I personally don't like it too much, but it does have its use cases over the other nades. If you need to get more distance, or if you're good at doing the mortar thing, it could be a good strategy to use. Next one is the smoke grenades. It's the RDG-2B, however the M18 is also really bad too. There needs to be some kind of smoke rework, because as of now you can see through both very easily, making them pointless. No one uses these, and I think it might be cool to add more useful smokes. Finally, the last category is flashes. This one is more of a personal preference. The M7290 has 0.5 less seconds before it goes off than the Zarya. I hope I'm saying that right. I don't know if I'm. However, this is at the cost of being almost 3 times heavier. It is also slightly more expensive. For these reasons, I'd probably say that the M7290 is slightly worse. Obviously, it's per case use, it's personal preference. And now, overall worst weapon in the game. Yes, it's the Blicky. But pre-Blicky, it was the Bars A2607 Damascus knife. And if you're only including firearms, it would be the Golden TT. Hope you enjoyed. If you didn't agree with these, let me know what you think is the worst weapon in each category, or maybe overall. I'd like to hear what you guys think. And if you enjoyed, like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.